is the latest entry in the not-so-crowded field of candidates competing for the Democratic nomination. Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips is here now. Some are calling him a long shot, dark horse, and a latecomer to the 2024 presidential bid. And while that may be true, Dean Phillips says it's time for a change. Hi, I'm Elliot Francis. Recent polls show an overwhelming majority of Democratic voters say they're just not convinced that Joe Biden should seek another term as president. About half of those say that Biden's age is their biggest concern. However, Minnesota House Representative Dean Phillips says he has a solution. First elected to Congress in 2018, Dean Phillips has represented Minnesota's 3rd congressional district for 3 terms. When he first took office in 2019, Phillips became the first Democrat to hold the seat since 1961. The congressman's voting record shows he's voted in support of Biden policy positions 100% of the time, and yet he's chosen to run for the 24 Democratic presidential nomination.
I am running for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States because, my friends, it is time for a change.
Born in St. Paul in 1969, Phillips' dad, Artie Pfeiffer, was killed in Vietnam when his son was less than a year old. His mother, Dee Dee, later remarried. Her new husband, Eddie Phillips, heir to the Phillips Distilling Company and son of Pauline Phillips, known to many fans as Dear Abby, immediately adopted young Dean. After college, Dean Phillips joined the family business, eventually being named president and CEO of Phillips Distilling. A recent CNN SSRS poll showed that if the election were held today, with Joe Biden and Donald Trump as nominees for each party, voters would support Trump by a margin of at least 4 percentage points. It's numbers such as these that Phillips says compels him to run, despite overwhelming odds. Joining us is Dean Phillips. Congressman Phillips has served as the U.S. House Representative for Minnesota's 3rd congressional district since 2019, and he is running for the Democratic presidential nomination. Congressman Phillips, thank you for joining us here on Now.
It is great to be with you, Elliot.
Man, great to be with you as well. Let's begin with motivation. You say you're not running against Joe Biden, but instead running for the future of America, and yet you're both running for the Democratic nomination. Isn't that a contradiction?
I think just the opposite, Elliot. Thank goodness we live in a country in which thoughtful competition leads to better outcomes. That's true in just about every facet of life, particularly politics. And when you ask about the why, the motivation, it goes back to when I was born. I lost my dad in Vietnam when I was just 6 months old. He earned an ROTC scholarship to attend college because he could not afford it otherwise. Grew up very poor in Minnesota. And when I was 6 months old, he was killed in action just 3 days after Americans landed on the moon for the first time. And my mom was 24 and widowed, and we lived with my great-grandparents in Minnesota for the first few years of my life, at which point I was very fortunate. My mom remarried a remarkable man, brought me into an extraordinary family, and I was blessed. And I recognize I've lived on both sides of advantage, and I'm really concerned about our future, my kids' future, all kids around this country and the world. The sad truth is I respect Joe Biden. I've voted for his policies. I endorsed him and helped his campaign in 2020. But right now, all the data, all the polling, all the people I'm speaking with all around the country, unfortunately are saying the same thing, that he will lose to Donald Trump. And when I woke up the morning of the 2016 election, Elliot, and my daughters were in tears, 16 and 18 years old, and I promised them that I would do something, and I ran for Congress, and I flipped a seat that had been Republican for 60 years. I'm not going to stop now and sit down and shush up when I think the future of the country is at grave, grave risk. And there's a culture of silence and delusion, frankly, that things are better than they really are. And I think it's incumbent on people who've been fortunate and at a time like this to step up, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
A recent New York Times poll that I'm sure you're familiar with suggests that if the election were held today, Joe Biden would lose to Donald Trump by margins of 4 to 10 percentage points in 6 battleground states. Now, yeah, we've seen this movie before. Candidates struggle with a year out before the election. What's to say that Joe Biden won't recover in a year?
Well, therein lies the fundamental question, Elliot. He could, but the sad truth is it's unlikely. And unlike the polls that were wrong in some of the last elections, they were wrong in the other direction.
Yeah.
We have a red alert right now. It's not just the battleground states where Joe Biden is losing in 5 of 6. It's not just the national numbers. It's also the historically low approval numbers, in which the only president in modern history who faced lower approval numbers was Jimmy Carter. And he got wiped out, of course, in that election.
Yeah.
And if you look at it carefully, then Tuesday night, I'm sure you've seen these numbers as well. An extraordinary night for Democrats. A 45-year-old next generation moderate governor in Kentucky wins again in red Kentucky. In Ohio, not politicians, but voters actually go to the polls, legalize cannabis, codify a woman's right to choose her reproductive freedom. And frankly, that's my whole pitch right there. President Biden, a good man, does not favor cannabis legalization. I do. His perspective on choice, I know he talks about it, and I respect that, but I am passionate about it. Democrats have missed opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to codify women's reproductive rights into law. I will do that. And also, as it relates to the exit polls, this is the worst part. There was a survey upon all the voters exiting, those who voted for cannabis legalization and for codifying women's reproductive rights in Ohio. They asked a simple question. Do you think Joe Biden should run again? Only 25% of those who favored legalization and women's reproductive freedom said yes, only 25%. We're in crisis. And Elliot, there is a political industrial complex that's Washington-based that would have us believe everything will just be fine. Just, hope and pray, cross your fingers, everything's going to work out. Yeah. Well, it didn't work out in 2016. And let me talk about Steve Schmidt, who in 2020 set up the Lincoln Project to help Joe Biden beat Donald Trump, which he did. President Biden contacted him afterwards to express gratitude. It was Steve Schmidt that approached me and said, in 2020, it was Joe Biden. And in 2024, you're the one that has to do this for the same reason. And I think there's a there that we should be acknowledging that President Biden, a good man, done a wonderful job, a great legacy, but we're at a point of critical concern and consequence if we go into this blindly. And by the way, it's not just about me. I want others to join the race.
Sure.
Still asking for others with the competency, the ability, and the recognition that we have to meet the moment now, not in 2028, now.
Yeah.
Join the race as Democrats in the primary.
You mentioned Steve Schmidt, and of course he was working with you at the beginning of your campaign. Has he ended his relationship with you, or is there still something there?
He volunteered to get this thing going. I could not have done that without him. I'm very grateful. Steve, of course, managed John McCain's campaign, and he saw the GOP moving far, far right. He became an independent. Now he's a Democrat, has been for 3 years.
Yep.
He has now left the campaign, but as a volunteer, he's going to do something on his own. That's up to him. And now I've hired 2 outstanding professionals, Zach Rauman, who ran Andrew Yang's 2020 campaign, and also Jeff Weaver, who is one of Bernie Sanders' senior strategists and leaders. And we have a little bit of a team of rivals, if you will, a beautiful team of rivals, disparate perspectives, a coalition that's going to be required, not just in a campaign, but the very way I intend to serve as president, which is to ensure that all voices, all colors, races, religions, politics, geographies, everybody has a voice in their White House, because we cannot manage like we have in the past. That's why we find ourselves in this terrible predicament.
Sure. One hopeful portion of that same New York Times poll that I found interesting was that people were asked if the election were held today and it were a generic Democratic candidate, how would you vote? People said that he would beat Trump by about 8 points, a generic candidate with no name.
I never aspired to be generic, Elliot, but you know what? I got to tell you, generic has never felt so good as it does right now for the reasons you just shared. Which look, I'm going to say I respect him, but the fact of the matter is, the only person right now in Democratic politics, actually there are 2, I should say, making it easier for Donald Trump to win the next election are Cornel West and Joe Biden. And the people are speaking, and I'm afraid they're not being heard, which is why we have Trumpism. I have to tell you, everybody. I have malice towards Donald Trump. He's a dangerous, bad man. People who believe in Donald Trump, that's very different. I know you're angry. I know you don't feel heard. And I understand why, because there is a system set up to prevent your voices from being received and acted upon in Washington. This is a perfect example. The polls are clear, but too many in Washington would try to have us believe that it's propaganda, it's not true, and we should just kind of keep the faith and everything's going to work out. Keeping the faith doesn't solve gun violence, it doesn't feed kids, it doesn't provide education or food or shelter, and it sure as heck does not win campaigns. We've learned that the hard way. I will not sit down. And I encourage others, like I said, come in. There's room for you. That's how we do it. And by the way, if I don't succeed, I think I will, but if I don't, I will wrap up this campaign with grace. I will give the same passion, energy, and support to whomever becomes the Democratic nominee as I've given to my own campaign. And that's why I want others to jump in the primary, not run as independents. Jill Stein, that's a problem. Cornel West, others who might endeavor to do so, Joe Manchin. Please do not destroy America. Please.
Let's talk about nuts and bolts for a second. You missed the filing deadline for Nevada. Of course, you hadn't announced your candidacy at that point. How much of a problem is that going to be?
Well, I wish I had. I set up a presidential campaign in 2 weeks, Elliot. Never before, probably in history, has someone done that, because in most points of history, American presidents have aspired to that job for years. They've set up political networks for years. They've written books. They've done all the things you do to check the boxes to become an American president. I'm doing this out of the intersection of need and consequence, and I did not have a campaign ready to go by the time of the Nevada filing. We will meet, succeed in just about every other state, I believe. By the way, I want people to know the barriers to entry based on filing, fees, signature requirements, these huge hurdles designed to reduce competition, to prevent participation, are really dangerous. And I got to tell you, New Hampshire, you bring a $1,000 check up to Concord to the State House, you're 35 years old, and you were born in the United States, you can become a presidential candidate, which is why there are 20 other people, including me, on that ballot. You won't see that in other places, and that's the problem. We make it too difficult to participate in elected office in America. We need more participation. We're going to get on the ballots. I'm sorry I wasn't in Nevada, but I'm going to be going to South Carolina. I'll be going to Michigan and just about every state in the country real soon. Yeah,
you've got Florida coming up. I think the deadline's coming up on the 30th. Have you filed there yet? There's Michigan at the beginning of December on the 8th, Arizona on the 11th. You're going to make those deadlines.
I'll tell you, Elliot, it takes a whole village. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of people. We've got an extraordinary team in place now. We will be meeting those deadlines. I will be on the ballot.
What happens, though, if at the end of the day, the math doesn't add up? You have to have a certain amount of delegates. The number escapes me right now. You might even know it. What happens if you just don't have enough delegates and the math doesn't add up?
Well, I'll tell you, I actually tweeted this yesterday, and I meant it sincerely. I was one of probably millions in the country who watched Bernie Sanders some years ago telling the country that the Democratic nominating process was rigged. And frankly, I thought he was a sore loser, and I didn't believe him. And I have to tell everybody, he's right. I had no idea how this mechanism essentially is designed to kind of work against people and empower just a handful who make the decisions for us. And I think that's something people are going to have to know, and I'm going to be talking more about it. But to answer your question, Bernie Sanders, to his credit, helped change that process. Instead of empowering people like me, superdelegates, because I'm an elected member of Congress, he encouraged and actually succeeded in having the DNC change that mechanism so that more power is afforded to voters, which I believe in this democratic republic is how it should work. I don't believe that simply elected officials or those who are part of a committee should have an outsized role in choosing our candidates. I think the whole point is to bring power to the people, give the votes to the people, open the doors, don't suppress them. So to answer your question, if I'm not in a position to win, I promise, heartfelt promise, that I will wrap this up with grace, with expedition, and I will get behind whomever is best positioned to beat Donald Trump. Policy and ideology are really important, but there is nothing more important in this election than defeating the most dangerous man in American history. There will not be a 2028 election in the fashion that I think Americans have come to know and appreciate and take for granted. if we don't defeat him. And unfortunately, President Biden and Vice President Harris, according to the numbers and the polls and the surveys and the reality, are simply not positioned to win. It's sad and disappointing, but it's true. And there's another option, and I'm going to bring a real hopeful, energetic, optimistic, and quite different policy proposition to a country that I believe really needs it, and to people who are really struggling to afford life right now. The American dream is out of reach, and we've got to do better, and we got to do it fast before it's too late.
I'm sure many people appreciate hearing that. But the field's getting a little crowded out there right now. It might even get more crowded as the days and months go by. Gavin Newsom, who's been imagined as a presidential candidate, but of course he hasn't announced yet, apparently is having some kind of debate with Ron DeSantis on Fox News at the end of the month on the 30th. I don't know if it's a real exact debate. It sounds like part of the Hannity show, but it feels like he's going to be out there at one point or another. Jill Stein, who you just mentioned, announced her candidacy just this week for the Green Party. It's getting crowded out there. How does that affect your run in this Democratic field?
Well, Elliot, I think a crowded field is great as long as it's in the primary field. The concern that I have, and let me say this, I think the duopoly, the Democratic and Republican duopoly, could use some competition. I think it's actually healthy. I just don't think this year is a year to have a number of independent candidates who would actually pull votes from whomever it is who's best positioned to beat Donald Trump. So Jill Stein and Cornel West, perhaps Joe Manchin and others, even RFK Jr. Wish he had stayed in the Democratic primary, because at the end of the day, I think this is existential. But my call is to any candidates who might believe that they have a chance, that they might be better positioned to beat Donald Trump. Come on in. You know, this is America. This is where you do it.
The water's fine. Come on in.
Sure. Hey, I don't care. How about you, Elliot? I mean, that's the beautiful part of America. Yeah. You can do it. Now look at, I will say Gavin Newsom. He's a great communicator. I've seen the polling myself in a number of groups that we've seen. When people are introduced to me and they see the numbers, the polling numbers with Biden-Harris, about 80% of those surveyed support me. Only about 20% would support Gavin Newsom. I think, unfortunately, that's because, if you can't fix the problems in your state, I'm not sure that you're in a position to fix the problems in the country. I do believe there are some others out there, though, who are better positioned, who have name recognition and great competency, are innovative and bold, and I would encourage you to come in. And by the way, if Governor Newsom wants to, by all means. But I can tell you that I don't think he's in a position to win a national election against Donald Trump. I am, and there's some blessing, believe it or not, to not being well known, because once people get to know me, I don't carry all that baggage into this race. I think we're gonna see some magical things happen if Americans get the choice between candidates.
All right, looking forward to it. Let's turn to current events, of course. As you mentioned before, you lost your father in the Vietnam War. You were only 6 months old at the time, but I'm sure an event like that influences your thinking as you grow older. What do you make of the current war in Gaza? And is there anything that you would do different with our allies if, in fact, you were president?
Yeah, I want to express my empathy and my compassion and my heart to Israelis who were butchered, to Palestinians who've lost their lives, innocents on both sides, not just this last number of weeks, but for years. And I think I'm part of a generation that has had enough of this. The nonsense, the bloodshed, the division, the destruction. I will tell you this, I think Hamas has got to be eliminated. They are the enemy of both Israel. They're also the enemy of Palestinians. Palestinians have not had the right to vote for their own leadership, their own self-determination since 2006. I do believe Hamas must be eliminated. And when that happens, I think it's time for Israel to choose new leadership. I think Benjamin Netanyahu and his settlement policy, his right-wing government, is a disaster, not just for Israel and for the Middle East. It's becoming a disaster for the American Jewish community as well. And the same is true with Palestinians. Abu Mazen is in his 80s now. Hamas is a horrifying seeker of war and destruction. I hope Palestinians will be afforded the opportunity to vote for peace themselves. And also in the United States, it's time for change. We cannot be doing it the same way that's been done for 50 years with almost no success. We find ourselves facing great threats from abroad, crisis at home. And that's what I'm offering, is generational change, a great new American century. And as for the war itself, when Israelis and Palestinians both choose peace, and I hope that is forthcoming very soon, it is incumbent on the President of the United States, our allies around the world, the Gulf states, the Arab states, to push, to impose, to ensure that there is a Palestinian state created. And I would be the first Jewish president in American history. And I would love to be the one that signs the documents that help create the first Palestinian state, ensure its security, its opportunity, and its safety, and do the same thing for Israel. And that's what our generation can do, must do, and will do if afforded the chance, and I believe it's right now.
That said, I'm glad to hear you say that because Secretary of State Anthony Blinken just this week is suggesting that when it's all said and done, that Gaza should be unified with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. Of course, once Hamas is dismantled, what do you make of that endgame? Ultimately,
like I said, I believe the only way to end the bloodshed, the only way to ensure Israel's security, the only way to ensure United States security, and the only way to afford the Palestinian people the chance for safety, security, and opportunity, the same things that I want for my children, the same things that you want for your family, the same things that every human being in the world wants, is just a chance to live. And it saddens me, it horrifies me, that seekers of ill will, that Iran and its proxies, in this case Hamas, Hezbollah, are not seeking peace, they're seeking destruction. And that's why we need to comprehensively turn a new page in our country and over there. And I believe that a unified, if you will, Palestinian state, Gaza and the West Bank, under thoughtful next generation leadership, with the intention to move to the future, would be incumbent then on the United States and other allies to invest in that. I had a conversation last night with a significant tech investor who does that in Israel and also the West Bank. I was told that the extraordinary talent in the West Bank is untapped, underappreciated, and just waiting for the opportunity to become an extraordinarily dynamic economy. I think that's important. I cannot wait, and I think as an American, I would love to play a role, and I intend to. I'm the ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee right now. I've been to Jerusalem twice this year, to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to Turkey, pushing for peace. I will continue to do that as president. And the good news, Elliot, is we have to take advantage of this horrific situation and ensure it is the very last time we see this kind of destruction.
Let me just interrupt you for a second, though, and just put you in the moment. If you were president now, we've got this horrible condition going on where certainly Israel should be and has to defend themselves and secure their border against Hamas. But doing that, as we've seen in the Gaza area, has caused the deaths of many Palestinians, many other people as well. We don't have a number, we don't have a makeup right now, but it's just awful. And I think people look at that and think, well, what are they doing? What are they doing? How do you split the difference between defending Israel and ensuring the safety of the people who are innocent, trying to get out of the Gaza area into other places right now? How do you split that difference?
So if I was the president right now, I would have ensured that we would have done everything humanly possible to build temporary facilities in Egypt, by the way, a country which we provide almost $1.5 billion a year in aid to. I would have encouraged, demanded, and implored that the international community unite behind preparing shelter to ensure that Gazans are exited from Gaza, from the Strip and inside, through the Rafah crossing. At which point, and that's why I do believe there should be a cessation of hostilities to afford that, because if you're going to have so many civilians in harm's way, it is horrifying as a human being. They should be removed to safety. Hamas must be eliminated, and there cannot be a ceasefire until the hostages are released. We have American hostages, by the way, American hostages that are under the control of a terrorist organization. And it is incumbent on the American president to rescue them, ensure their safety, and use every single tool at our disposal to get them home. That has not occurred yet. I would do it a little differently, but I do not want to intervene during wartime, both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. I do think the administration has generally done a fine job of ensuring that American lives have not been lost, but I think there is more to do. We need courage, we need conviction, and we most of all need to implore that those who we are supporting with billions of dollars stand up now to ensure that human lives are saved and we can move to a more peaceful future. That is the time. It is right now.
We've got I guess it's 4 hours, I've even seen 6 hours pauses in the battle and in the event down there now to allow people to bring in supplies, humanitarian supplies, and let people move to the south and hopefully over the border. Is that enough?
It's a beginning, because the horror is, and again, I don't want to, my compassion is for all civilians and innocent people whose lives have been lost and those at risk. And I want to reflect on the Israelis, over 1,500 Israelis who were killed and butchered in the most horrific fashion. And now thousands of Palestinians lost their lives who could have had bright futures if we would have had leadership in Israel and in Palestine and in the United States and all around the world that should have prevented this horror from happening over the last number of decades. I think it's a good beginning. I'm pleased that there's going to be at least a modest cessation of hostility to get food and aid and humanitarian support in and allow people to move. But that does not protect the lives that I think can be protected if we would simply stand up temporary shelter outside of Gaza. And by the way, have the international community ensure the return, because I know a lot of Palestinians say if we leave Gaza, we'll maybe never be let back in. I understand why, but that cannot happen. That's the only way to save lives, Elliot, I'm afraid. And I'm disappointed that weeks have passed. We have the mobilization of the international community could have done this, still can do this, and I believe it's still not too late and must be done.
Speaking of Gaza, a couple of weeks ago, you had a town hall in New Hampshire, which a few of the folks were quite angry over one of your responses to a question about Gaza.
And I want to do better, and I'd like you to be my partner in this. If we treat each other in an antagonistic way, we are not going to solve the problems that are facing the country. And I hope I answered all your questions. I'm calling for the elimination of a terrorist organization that will...
At the expense of children's lives! At the expense of children's lives! At the expense of children's lives!
You're right.
Please be so serious! Be so serious right now! This is at the expense of children's lives!
That woman said that you hadn't answered her question. Now, you've got, by your own count, you've got about 119 of these left to go going forward. Is there anything you would have done differently in that moment?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Elliot, because I wish I could see her right now, and I thought I expressed empathy and compassion, and I'm a human being, and this is a very emotional time for all of us. As a Jewish American, you can imagine my empathy for Israelis that were not mentioned in her remarks, and I understand. It is incumbent on the leader, especially the President of the United States, to be empathetic, to listen, and to understand during times like these how emotional and how anger-inspiring such days are. I would like to say I understand. And as I try to explain, I actually share your compassion for humanity, and that's why I'm expressing to you right now, Elliot, what I would do and why it's important that we create a Palestinian state, and that I would be the president that would do everything he possibly could to make that a priority to get done. But you know what? I think most politicians would never acknowledge that they can do better, that they can learn lessons, that they can improve, and I will do so. I'm a man of compassion. I care about human beings. All of our blood spills red. I don't care about your race, your religion, your politics, your geography. We are a world of human beings, and we must start treating one another with that respect, and we got to stop fighting each other and start fighting for one another, and that is the message I would really love to share with her. That I respect you, that I love you, I understand. I apologize if I did not listen in the manner that you would have expected. Next time I will, and I promise you that, and I get it.
Hopefully she'll see that. A couple of last things before we run out of time here. Gun violence, of course, the most recent up in Lewiston, Maine, 18 people dead, many others injured. What are we supposed to do here? And before you answer that, let me just give you something that's been rolling around in my head forever. It seems as though that we have gun violence, mass shootings that have occurred over the past 2 decades. In anybody's memory, there are 2 common denominators that exist. Mental health, a person who's mentally ill, who can legally get a gun. It seems to me that within comprehensive background checks, we could include a mental health evaluation for each and every person who buys a gun. It may even be, you may even have to renew it every so often. But before you buy a gun, we need to know what the state of your mental health is before you buy the gun. And if it's not good, you don't get the gun. And if it is, you can have a gun because people own guns legally in this country, and they should for other purposes. That's my idea. What's your idea going forward as president to end this gun violence?
And Elliot, I think it's a fine idea. I've already voted to support universal background checks for that very reason. Here's what I'd say. I'm a gun owner. I think, first of all, Democrats have to stop leading with gun control, because that's a great way to end the conversation with about half of Americans. You know what unifies us is gun violence prevention. I don't know a single AR-15 owner, handgun owner, a rifle owner, hunter, sports person that wants to see their kids butchered by a massacre in a shopping mall or in a school or in a bowling alley. That's just nonsensical. I want to be the kind of president that acknowledges none of us want to see this. So what do? Yes, I think we should have universal background checks. I also believe, Elliot, that we should look at a group called the Violence Project. They're based in my state of Minnesota. James Densley and Jillian Peterson have done the research. They've interviewed the very perpetrators of these massacres that have survived. There are only a handful. And here's what they told me. They said there are two things we can do and must do that will actually reduce these massacres. First and foremost, it is usually a suicide. 90% of these massacres result in the suicide of the perpetrator. And yes, they're not well. They have emotional challenges that are easily recognizable, and I'll get to that in a second. But if we can invest in reducing suicide, we will achieve reductions in gun violence. And by the way, not just in gun violence, we'll save tens of thousands of American lives a year. Veterans who are dying in mass, 30,000 veterans have committed suicide since the Gulf War, Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, think about that, 30,000 veterans. So we can invest in suicide prevention. And then the other issue is this: 80% of those who commit these massacres have either implicitly or explicitly told friends, family, or posted on social media their intentions. So if we had red flag laws, which Maine did not, by the way, that perpetrator was screaming for help.
Absolutely.
Screaming. And there was not a single mechanism available for law enforcement to do something about it.
Right.
I've had enough. It is so fundamental. It is easy. Red flag laws around the country. And by the way, we have to invite firearm owners to the table because they have ideas too. They don't want to see anyone's kids killed. So let's unify. Let's work together. And when I'm president, Elliot, I'm going to appoint a common sense czar to start saving money and having a more efficient government. And I will also have a gun violence czar, because this is an American crisis of historic proportions. We're the only nation in the entire world suffering from this. If we prevent suicides, have red flag laws and universal background checks, we will prevent a lot of these horrible massacres. And then the fundamental question is this: do we want to be a country where we allow 18-year-olds who have not yet had their brains fully developed to acquire weapons of mass destruction that create mass human carnage in the matter of moments, that are essentially the same weapons that are in the hands of many in our military? That's a question I think that should be asked, but that's up to Americans. And I will be a president that tries to unify behind thoughtful policy that combines conservative and progressive thinking to reduce death. Period.
Yeah, lot to chew on there, absolutely, and a lot to do. Last question before we run out of time here. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the border and immigration. A lot of crazy stuff coming out of the most recent Republican debate. Candidates saying we're going to send the military down there, which of course is not legal according to the Constitution.
Illegal.
Yeah, illegal, as people know. Posse comitatus. If just look it up if you haven't already. What would you like to do? What would you intend to do if you were president about that issue?
I'm glad you asked. I'm somebody who believes that I have to see things with my own eyes. I have to investigate things personally before I opine. I wish more people would do that and get off their screens and actually go look. I've been to the southern border twice. I've seen some of the most horrific, embarrassing, disastrous, and offensive circumstances I've ever seen as an American citizen. It is the failure of Democratic administrations and Republican administrations for generations. Seeing human beings in cages when I went there is one of the most appalling things I've ever seen in my entire life. I saw compassion, by the way, exhibited by Border Patrol agents looking after infants who were abandoned. We didn't even know who their parents were. But I got to tell you, we need border security. But most of all, we have to start preventing the problem at its source. And we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year, Elliot, right now on foreign aid. But we don't do it effectively or strategically. So what would I do? I would identify the countries from which the migration is occurring, Northern Triangle countries. I would build shelters, dormitories, if you will, near our consulates to ensure that we could provide safety and security to families and individuals who believe their lives are at risk. We should use our foreign aid dollars to invest in security and opportunity, economic opportunity in those places. And then we should not force these people to follow American law to come across our border to declare asylum. My proposition would be to file for asylum in your country of origin. You can live in a dormitory. We'll keep you safe there. It's a lot less expensive for us to do it that way. We will adjudicate your case in your country of origin. And then you will save that $6,000 or $7,000 per person that you've saved up your whole life, only to pay a Mexican gang, coyotes, criminals, to take you across the Rio Grande into the United States. If we did that, we'd have people that had more money. And by the way, if they qualify for asylum, then we should bring you here with your $6,000 or $7,000, your nest egg to start a life in America where you can succeed and pursue the dream that all of us want pursued. That's the way we actually go upstream and prevent the problem before it gets to the border. Let me just finish with this. Yes, we need better border security. Our infrastructure is out of date. Our ports of entry are disasters. We need some barriers. We need technologies. We need the most well-trained Border Patrol staff in the world. And we need that because it is a national security issue. We have malign actors all around the world that know they can send people across the southern border. And by the way, I live in Minnesota. Rest assured, you can walk right from Manitoba over a farm field into the United States, into my state of Minnesota. This is not just a southern border issue. This is a fundamental border security issue for national security. And Democrats have got to join with Republicans in being thoughtful and acknowledging the truth. And that's my intention as the Democratic nominee for president. I will speak the hard truths. May not be popular at first, believe me, I understand. But I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell you the truth, even if it's not politically expedient, because that's the kind of leadership the next generation is begging for, and I intend to get it done.
All right. Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips, thank you for the privilege of your time, and all the best in the upcoming Democratic primary season.
Thank you, Elliot, and keep the faith, everybody. Keep the faith. We're going to do better.
And thank you for keeping the faith and joining us here every now and then. Remember to like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, then come back here for another edition of Now. Till then, take care. Peace.